out of it. I heard Brigette on the radio on Triple J on Hack on the 21st of October, which was Back to the Future Day. And I was listening to her and I thought, that woman is incredible. The next day I Googled her in this new world we live in, and here she is. So, and she described, I love this word, she describes herself as, correct me if I say this wrong, but pracademic.
That's it.
Yeah, I love the word pracademic. I haven't said it before, so it's a great word. Working across design, strategic foresight and culture at Swinburne University. She coordinates the Masters of Design for the undergraduate course in communication design at Swinburne. 20 years experience in brand, design and innovation strategy, and her work focuses on the potential of design and futures to tackle challenges intersecting people, community and systems. She's worked at one of Australia's best known design firms, and she has since been involved in creating brands you probably use every day. She's got a BA and an MA from Monash and a master's degree in strategic foresight from Swinburne. Been very involved in not-for-profits for most of her life, and currently part of the team of Project Geldem, which is a research initiative partly funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to develop the next generation condom. So anyone interested in research trials, have a chat to Brigette after at the end of the night.
Have a try.
So over to you, Brigette. Thank you very much.
And we won't be watching, so I'm interested in giving us feedback on a new material for a condom that you can't feel. Yeah, see, that's Does anyone wear contact lenses? Okay, can you really feel them in your eye most of the time? Yeah. So that's what this condom is like. That's like my dental moment, that's it. I will admit straight up that I'm a dystopian futurist. I'm also a critical futurist. So I'm not a pessimist, but I am dystopian. So I have an image of the world in particular futures where it's not bad, it's just a decline and descent. And I actually think that's a good thing because it gives us a chance at doing something differently. So I'm not going to talk about any of that tonight. I'm going to talk a little bit about foresight, a little bit about design, and a little bit about community and youth and education and community organisations, and some things that we might want to look for around 2045. I should also at this point say that just because I'm a futurist doesn't mean I do predictions. So there are no crystal balls, there are no lotto numbers, there is no weather forecast, particularly in Melbourne, and I don't have any hoverboards or robots as yet, although I work with robots. So foresight, I'm an academic, there has to be a definition, it has to be referenced. What I'm really talking about with foresight is our capacity to look beyond where we are in the present. So I'm kind of coming off the back of what Peter has said and backfilling a little bit around the technical detail because I teach in strategic foresight, but also wanting you to think about what is that capacity for foresight that Peter might have awakened in you, and what are the kinds of things that you can be looking for. One of my heroes is a guy called Jim Dato, who founded the Manoa School at the University of Hawaii. He has a number of rules around the future, and one of them is that any image of the future must be ridiculous to be useful. Because the more ridiculous it is, the more challenging it is, and the more likely we are to either describe it, discard it, or chase after it. And quite frankly, who imagined Facebook? I'm sitting over there with a device that I can write into with a stylus. Someone decided these were good things. Someone designed them, someone created them. So design is also one of the reasons that we're in the state of the world that we're in. So we'll also be really clear about that. This stuff that's going on in this world is because there's a lot of bad design out there. There's an awful lot of really good design, but there's some bad design as well. And I'm not going to dwell too much on design. I'd like you to think about the world that you might want and how you might conjure up the things around it, or do the things around you that get you towards that preferred future. Okay, so I think I've probably covered this already. I did do a degree in strategic foresight, so I'm a qualified futurist. I'm also a qualified feminist, so I'm not sure whether they balance each other out or not. But practically what we're talking about is having the capacity to think about things that haven't happened yet, to imagine and describe using our mind and then using the objects or the products or forms around us to bring that future to where we want it to be. There are a number of tools that we use in foresight that I'm not going to bore you with tonight, But there are tools like the Futures Cone, which allow us to look for a number of different futures, because there's always alternative futures out there to be pursued and designed and then created. It's not about this. We are made promises all the time about the things that we're going to be using. And there are lots of images of the future that have been created by clever people. But there's also lots of images of the future that we've subscribed to. So that device that you've got in front of you, the thing, who's got an iPad or one of those tablets that you can touch and do things with? Yeah, do you remember where that first happened? Anyone seen a movie called Minority Report? Okay, so the image appeared, then someone created it. So that's what I really want to get out of this tonight, that we don't necessarily have to take those futures and those images of the future as the things that are predicated for us. They're put up there as images of what might be. It's up to us to decide whether we want that, and then we can go after it. So if we really want the big plasma screen, we can have it. If we really want the hoverboard, we just have to let people know that we have to get around physics to get one. Same with flying cars. There's a physics issue there that makes them slightly impossible at the moment. But that's why Nike went about the sneakers. So that's the backstory to Nike's self-lacing sneakers. They had been imagined, they said it was likely to be possible, and for the 30th anniversary, they gave a pair to Michael J. Fox, which was pretty cool. If you want to Google that as a video, it's a really lovely video that shows what a strong man he is. So this capacity to think about the future is also having meaningful conversations about what we want and where we want to be, whether it be 5 years, 10 years, or 30 years out. I'm 47, so hopefully I am going to be here in 30 years' time. There's people who aren't in this room who will have just been born in that time. So when we're talking about the future, we're also talking about futures for people who are yet to exist. So there's one voice that isn't here, and that is the voice of the future. The voice that has yet to be heard and the voice that is yet to be born. So when we make decisions about what we do, what we create, and how we live, we're doing it on behalf of a generation that's yet to be decided, that's yet to be conceived. So the people who are even having those children in 30 years' time are only maybe just being born out themselves. So, some of the things that make it really hard being a futurist is this being able to be global and local. Taking responsibility for the stuff that you do, because it has consequences for people who are not just around you, but on the other side of the world. I travel way too much, way too much. But I'm aware of what I do and I'm aware of my impact. And I think about what are the consequences of those decisions and what are the consequences of not doing those things. So remember that every action you take has consequences, but also not doing something is an action in itself. If you choose not to do something, it has consequences in the same way that doing something does. They may be different, but there are still consequences of not doing it. So if I eat the chocolate, there are consequences. If I don't eat the chocolate, there are different consequences. So not doing something may or may not be better for me. Let's not talk state of mind versus state of hips. So, one of the easiest ways to have people think about the future is to go back in time. What do you think about what you were doing in 1985? So at the end of 1985, I was just finishing school. I just had my 30-year reunion, which is absolutely terrifying. What were you doing in 1985? Does anyone remember? Do you remember what was being played on the radio?
Dexy's Midnight Runner.
It indeed was, as was The Cure. And The Cure are about to do a tour of North America and Europe next year, as sad as that may sound. It's pretty exciting, actually, because they're still around. But they're planning a tour 30 years on. So if I had children, I might be able to go and see a band from my childhood with my children. I went to see Deep Purple with my dad. That was pretty cool. Now, what were you doing in 1985 when all of this stuff happened? Does anyone remember Live Aid? It was the first time I stayed up overnight for stuff. I sat up and watched every band that played when I was 16 or something. There was a favourite car bomb. It sounds a little bit familiar, doesn't it? When did we have a bomb recently in Beirut? We had Windows 1.0. It's a good thing we're now at Windows 10. We had the first blood screening for AIDS, which is significant given that AIDS and HIV is on the rise in some parts of the world again, which is why I have my condom project and why the Gates Foundation is funding it. Those guys in the UK discovered the hole in the ozone layer. It was 30 years ago. It's shrunk, but we still have that issue with planet and environment that you so eloquently described. We also had the launch of Atlantis Space Shuttle, Nintendo NES. Is anyone still playing with that? No, I don't think so. The Rainbow Warrior was sunk in Auckland, and Israel did something that had to do with getting refugees out of a difficult part of the world. So it's sounding a little bit familiar, but it's still 30 years ago. So in 2045, which is 30 years from now, we could still be looking at the same kinds of circumstances. And they correlate to bigger emerging issues and global issues. Things like global crises around finance, economics. Poverty and hunger could still prevail in some parts of the world in 30 years. Currently the largest emerging economy, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is India at the moment. And Nigeria is starting to come up in the ranks as well. Now, we were talking about the BRICS only a few years ago. There's been a very subtle but powerful shift in the way those economies are emerging, and it's linked to a lot of these things. And I'm not going to go into your territory by any means. We're still talking about shifts in technology. We didn't think we'd have a phone that would start out this big and then shrink down to this big, and is now getting bigger and bigger and bigger again. According to the technology people, we're going to be getting rid of laptops, we're going to be getting rid of desktops, and it's all going to be wearable. Personally, I'm not keen on an implant quite yet. Don't really think that's going to be comfortable. I won't be an early adopter on that one, even though I was an early adopter with bulletin board systems, which were the precursor to messaging systems. Does anyone use a bulletin board apart from me? Yeah. So very similar. Does anyone remember Win Pop-Up and how bad that was? That was an instant messaging system that predates a lot of the things that we use now. We're still concerned around health and disease. There are lots of things that existed 30 years ago that are still around. We haven't fixed all of those things, partly because we're dealing with wicked problems, which are wicked problems. They can't be solved very readily or easily. They're at the systems level, not just the stuff that we can fix with a little bit of design or some good thinking. Research and exploration, entertainment, all of these things prevail. So, how old are you going to be in 2045? What's the world going to be like for you? Where will you live? Will you still be living where you are? There are some parts of Australia that are going to be affected by climate change rather radically in 30 years' time. We used to joke about people buying a beach property inland. There are people on the west coast of the States who are wishing they didn't have a beach property because it might not have land very soon. The Maldives is shrinking. I recommend if you want to go to the Maldives, go soon. It is beautiful and it is worth the trip, but it's slowly disappearing, or rather more rapidly disappearing. Who is your family and your community in 30 years? How are we going to define those things? How do you want family and community to be defined in 30 years' time? Is it going to be the people immediately around you, or are they going to be in different parts of the world? What I want you to think about, please, is what is that world 30 years from now and how did we get there? So I've done a little bit of work around this. How might we travel? If you look at this bit of work that we travel and where. I haven't asked are we driving cars because I don't know whether we are driving cars in 30 years' time. We might not be able to drive in 30 years' time, but we might not have to drive because we might be able to teleport. Right? That's a big imaginative claim, but we might be able to do things slightly differently. What I did do was think about something that's more immediate, because this is 30 years away, and it's harder to think out 30 years than to say 5 or 10. So if you think that, what I'm talking about is it's a long time away, how would I go about approaching this? Well, I did some work with 4 different kinds of scenarios. Again, I'm not going to bore you with the science behind it, but there are 4 different types of scenario that generally get developed, and I've developed 4 that are a little bit closer in time than 2045. Sorry, I know you said 30 years out, but it's a stepping stone. This is where I think we're probably going to be sitting around in 30 years, and this is probably the conditions that we're dealing with. We're designing education for people who have at least 17 jobs, and that's the report that the Foundation for Young Australians was talking about a few months ago. It was a crisis in education because I'm sitting in front of 19, 20-year-old students saying, oh no, you're training me for a job that won't exist. And I said, yeah, that's great, because the job that I do didn't really exist a long time ago as well. Does anyone here work in community management or social media or know of the job title webmaster? Yep. Now, how long have those terms been around? Social media, really only since Facebook. Webmaster, early 90s, because that's when we got the internet and that's when we got websites. So this fear around, oh no, we're training people for jobs that won't exist, is a little redundant because the jobs may not have been invented yet. So we're likely to get growth in personal training areas, or the people who are fixing the driverless cars, or potentially more insurance because they have to reconfigure their responsibility when it comes to the driverless car doing the stuff that it probably shouldn't have done because it's controlled by something else. So looking a little bit closer, so 2025, there's a scenario in which we're flexing for growth. We're looking at people with labour markets being really high skilled, people with lots of education, lots of capacity to work, where it's a very highly fluid job market, lots of job opportunities, very, very open to change, but people need to upgrade skills, get their skills constantly in order to remain flexible. Education itself has been deinstitutionalised, so we might not have the university as we know it now. My university has morphed and evolved in the last 5 years, particularly in the last 2, and we're doing much more that's online and peer-to-peer education. We also could be looking at alternative credentialing. So MOOCs may not be proven to work quite so well yet, but there's an opportunity. So a MOOC is a massively online open course, potentially studied by 40 or 50,000 people online, asynchronously, so at different points in time over a period of study. Another scenario is around a growing gap, where you've got an increasing gap between people who have stuff and people who don't, whether it be money, education, access to housing, resources, whatever it is, there is a crisis around what's going on around governance and the system and where we're living. It's not necessarily the future that's going to happen. We have to think about what gets us to that future and make the changes now to prevent that sort of dissonance happening. The other two may be more exciting to some people, what I call flex despocracy. I'm still not sure about that term, but you know, I made it up the other day on a desk that is yours, but you determine it. You're almost autonomous, you're functioning within a bigger society, and there's lots of new growth opportunities. So very similar to the positive aspects of one of the other scenarios, but it's a focus on people being able to supplement each other and support one another in a very flexible network. Lots of flat organisational structures. There's a couple of organisations that have moved to this system. So it allows me to put a muffin and a bit of ham and a bit of cheese and an egg and then the other part of the muffin into like a massively tall sandwich press and cook it all simultaneously. Sounds convenient, but the pull on resources to produce that is hideous. And it's like, why do we need that? Do we really need that kind of a device? No. Yeah. So some people will say no. Some people will say yes. But it's a question around what are we designing that delivers us to a future. If we don't want a future where it's all about automated presses, then we shouldn't be designing the stuff that gets us there. We should be designing the forms and the functions and the products and the services that get us to that future that we actually desire and aspire to. And this is where things like cyber security, personal security, food security, human security become paramount. Because we're designing stuff in and out of our lives that doesn't necessarily get us to that future in 2045 that we really want. What might happen in 2025? What I would want for you out of tonight is a question around what do you hope for in your futures? There is no one future. The future doesn't actually exist. It's up to us to create it. And it's the stuff that we put into it that determines what that future is. So if we want a sustainable future, a human future, if we want one that is useful for us, then design the future that you want to live in.